You gotta focus, so thanks. All right, I am gonna get started. This is being live cast, so all around the world. You can tell your friends, neighbors, and families. I will try to take questions through this. I will take some questions through this, but I do have a lot to cover. So Chris Barbieri, welcome to K-Scope. First timers, raise your hand. Wow. Second, third year, anybody? Okay. Well, everybody who's here for the first time, I'm looking forward to seeing you all in Seattle. It will be awesome, so come back and bring more friends. So the session today is called Imagine That. And for me, it's this idea that I wanted to talk about design concepts that were really a little bit original. I've looked at hundreds of applications. I helped launch HFM 17, 18 years ago. So I've seen applications from all over the world. And these are some ideas that I've seen that I think are a little uncommon. That's probably a better way to phrase it. Welcome. The evaluations, I know you've been to a few sessions today. Hopefully, you know that you can fill it out on paper, but better, you can actually fill it out in the app. So go into the session, down the bottom, there's a link, just fill that out. It makes a difference because we use those evaluations when we're looking at next year's conference. If you like somebody, say something. If you would prefer something else, let us know. So I work with Finit. There's a couple of Finit slides here. Not sure what to say what can we say about Finit? It's an awesome company. I love the company, but let's move on to the content. Oh, we work with a lot of big companies. I think a lot of the consulting companies here are sharing that with you. I will also just add that in the consulting realm, you probably know, we are all friends. A lot of us have worked together for many, many years, so there are a lot of good companies around here. I'm an Oracle ACE. If anybody's interested in becoming an Oracle ACE, Laurie LaRusso and the Oracle Developer Network is just outside where we had the main session, I think. You can go talk with her. It's really some sort of a status or title that says these people know what they're talking about, and we help Oracle to kind of spread the word. So that's it, and on with the show. So I originally called this Pure Imagination. The idea is just to get your imagination going. Think about ways that you can look at your HFM applications. I'm not suggesting a redesign, but in some cases we can make some changes to do something a little more helpful. If you're going to do a redesign, well, these are things to think about. So the title Pure Imagination is the name of a song. Who's seen the original Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory with Gene Wilder? Yes, I love that. The one with Johnny Depp, it was okay, it was interesting, but I love this. So that was my inspiration for it. So the agenda today, I love to start with the metadata statistics, which is, you'll see in a moment, what are people doing in their applications from a metadata volume perspective. I'm going to go into some of the different dimensions. I'm going to talk about entities. We can have a discussion about what is an entity, because that's kind of a funny concept. Talk about hierarchies, some different things that you can do with rules around the hierarchies. Then we're going to go into scenarios, some ideas about, especially around FX analysis. Come on up front, there's a lot of seats up here. And I will walk to the back and ask you questions, so you're not safe anywhere. Hi, Jeff. And then we're going to get into custom dimensions, which, though it's the smallest bullet here, it's probably the greatest area of flexibility in application. I realize this is small. Again, you can download this, but I will give you the updated set that you're looking at right now. Over the years, especially when I was with Hyperion from 1999 until 2007, and during that time, I was a product issues manager. I escalated a lot of product bugs and escalated cases with development and support. And I'm personally fascinated with performance. So I always wondered, well, what are people doing with the application? What makes a big application? Because sometimes you'll think, well, it's a big application, it's got a lot of data. Well, if you've looked at it, this is statistics from 144 applications. I've got a pretty good sense about what's a big application and what's a small application. So I'd like to share this with you, and you can take a look at this. And it's the count, the number of unique members in each dimension. And then I have the median, which, what's the middle of that whole data set. And then just one standard deviation. What's kind of from the middle to above average? And this range, if you're in here, perfectly normal. You've got nothing to worry about with respect to your design. Over here in red is the high, the greatest number of members that I've seen. One of the fun ones is 75,000 members in Custom 1, I think. Anybody come close to that or exceed that? No? That application, by the way, most of these in the high column, I've been in the emergency room with them. But it's not always because of the number of members here. This application in rules, we took an hour and 20-minute consolidation time and cut it down to 8 minutes and left it with 75,000 members. I like the look on your face, Tammy. A little shocked? Now, how about this? I am currently designing an application that has 11 custom dimensions. Anybody exceed that? No? All right. This thing flies. We are loading millions of records into HFM. It's 600 or 700 entities, and it consolidates in 8 minutes per period. Impressed? Let's bring the S-based crowd in here and ask them how they feel about 11 custom dimensions. So I'm going to talk more and more about that. Again, you can download this and take a look at this and compare. Let me know what you find. So over on the right are just some comments. 90% of the applications most of these are from North America. 90% of the applications have more than one currency. Well, that's okay, great. Well, let me rephrase that. 10% of the applications have only one currency on them. Now that becomes a little more odd, but it happens. Okay, so, what is this lady's name? I keep forgetting. I know she, Violet? That's it. Of course that makes sense, right? She had to get squeezed out. So that's Violet. How much is too much? Okay, so what's an entity? The entity dimension, I guess I should go back here for a second. Average number of entities in an application is somewhere between 672 and 5,500. It's a big range. Well, 28,000, and I'm pretty sure somebody in here I know who's out of, there you go. You're taking ownership of that one? I love true confessions. 28,000. So how's performance with 28,000 entities? Could be better. Nice attitude. It could be better. And what did you guys do afterward? What are you doing right now with that? What do you mean? You have 28,000 entities. I'm pretty sure over lunch I discussed that with somebody that you're thinking about moving some of those into a custom. Is that true? All right, I should repeat that for the studio audience. So it's an application, not to dwell on yours in particular, but it is interesting that you have your locations. It's Yum Brands, you have your actual Taco Bells and all of your stores. So when we looked at that application, the entity dimension is the most expensive dimension from a performance perspective. I've told you already that 11 customs flies. If you have the design option and you're trying to figure out, okay, I'd like to add 5,000 cost centers into my entity dimension versus I'd like to add 5,000 things into a custom dimension and add 2, 3, or 4 more customs, choose the latter. HFM is sensitive to the entities and insensitive to the customs. And it is technically architected to have, I don't know, I'm going to throw it out there, I think 80 customs. I actually do have a formula I can tell you what the answer is, but let's say that it's more than 20. So my advice to you is don't hesitate. But with respect to the entity dimension, what's interesting is, well, what makes up an entity? We just talked about some of the stores. Those are your retail restaurants, right? Cost centers is another common one. Normally, I mean, an entity in HFM isn't like a technical legal thing. It's just a bucket. It's something for a set of data. It could be a full trial balance. It could be a piece of a trial balance, depending on how we define it. We define it based on how we're going to flexibly use the application. But you know, some people will insist that the entity dimension should reflect statutory. Well, statutory in itself is a fuzzy thing. It just says that's what you're reporting to the government, whatever the government is. In insurance, anybody work in the insurance business, right? In insurance, statutory is for the state. Massachusetts, New York, right? A lot of other industries don't think about that. For them, it's which country they're reporting to. So it's fuzzy, and it's kind of fun to me. Company code is probably one of the most common things to associate for entities because it's nice. It lines up with your ERP systems. I guess company code could be legal entity. Maybe a group of company codes comprise a legal entity. Cost center is when you're breaking it up. Usually that's for P&L analysis where you want, maybe you're taking something through gross margin or maybe your whole P&L and you're putting that in some entities and then your balance sheet goes in another entity. Who does that? Any applications here that split up you guys have that? The only drawback to that, and that's interesting because you can do a lot of alternate analysis in your hierarchies. The drawback to that is you don't have a balanced entity until you bring them all together. So what you have is what that design has, not to pick on you, is you can't have a balanced balance sheet until you pull them all together and consolidate. All of that comes into a single currency. But if you want all of those cost centers and entities to be translated into other currencies, well, their parent is the total company. If you want them translated into something else, well, geez, then you have to pull those into alternate hierarchies, and now, just to get the translation, you're going to be managing currency hierarchies, which I'll show in a moment. And then later, I'm going to talk about customs. So here's another one, and that's what I mean by translation challenges. Do you want each cost center in one currency, the whole entity in multiple? It's something to think through. Here's a design that I had where we had concatenated entities. It was entity, cost center, and product line with 3 in 1. I just told you that I'd rather see multiple custom dimensions because it would perform much better. I really don't like this, but we don't live on our own in this world. Some of us have to coexist with Hyperion planning, which is very, very sensitive to additional customs. So you make some negotiations based on the whole system design. This, in the end, this actually worked pretty well, but if it was just HFM, I wouldn't do that. Anybody have concatenated entities? We have 2 dimensions living in one.
Question, that logic about having more dimensions instead of concatenation, does that also apply in FCCS?
Oh, so the question is, this idea of having more customs, does that apply to FCCS? Jordan?
It will, yes.
Well, you can have custom dimensions, but it's not a good idea from a design perspective because FCCS is based on S-base, which is very sensitive to having additional customs. So you can, but you probably don't want to. Right. And Jordan and I just spent the afternoon with Oracle talking about this. They're working hard on performance, but I can tell you based on everything that I understand about FCCS, S-based planning, HFM performs remarkably well when you have a lot of customs. I don't want to get in any other flame wars, so we'll move on. But FCCS is based on S-base. All right, hierarchy variations. So we can group together the entities in a lot of different ways. I mean, one of the earlier slides when I show you the statistics, I think, I should go back, The number of hierarchies on average is somewhere between 4 and 11. This one with 44, don't do that. Please don't do that. That one was a real problem. But somewhere between 4 and 11 is a normal number of alternate hierarchies for HFM. Perfectly fine. Fewer is better. Fewer is better. But let's talk about why we have multiple hierarchies. Most, probably 98% of the applications out there will have legal in their hierarchy. They'll have a legal somewhere. Once in a while, I do see somebody where their HFM consolidation hierarchy doesn't reflect their legal structure. They're really odd, but I've seen it. Management, most companies have a management hierarchy, unless they have just one, which is legal. Year-specific hierarchies, these aren't a good idea. If you have, Chris underscore 2018, Chris underscore 2017, it's not a good idea because you're creating, like every year, or help us out here, every quarter, you're creating another hierarchy. Every entity and every parent and every child-parent combination is a set of data that's stored in your database. Every additional hierarchy you have is storing another set of data, and it's calc time. And it's hassle because you have to manage those. And what happens when you restructure? Do I go back and change 2017? No, because that's why I created 2017 anyway. Yeah, but I want 2017 as if we had done this. Well, now I have 2017 A and B, and it just kind of gets out of hand. So it happens. Person-specific to me is really fun. You will probably not see the Bob hierarchy, but we all know that this is the hierarchy that Bob asked us to create. And Bob left the company 6 years ago. And no one knows why. Can we remove it? I understand that, and I don't really have advice for you except try to resist that and try to think about satisfying the whole audience. Continuing and discontinued operations, that can be pretty helpful, except sometimes we do continued and discontinued operations. A given entity might be split. So moving an entity into one bucket or the other doesn't help unless the whole entity moved. But usually we can do that in a custom. You see where this whole this conversation's going? I'm going to be talking about customs. Acquired company, if you acquire a company, they want to see what they were standalone versus incorporated. Tax, another tax hierarchy, those can be interesting. Usually they're the same as legal, but sometimes they're not. Regional, this one, the USD reporting. A moment ago I talked about especially if you have cost centers in your entity hierarchy, at some point, anybody here translate your entities using a grid? You have all your entities down the rows, and then you have US dollar, entity currency, something like that. You highlight the column, right click and say translate, force translate. Really? Okay. Thanks, Gary, for fessing up. Everyone, this is Gary. He fessed up. Thanks, man. So in that situation, haven't we talked about couldn't you just have all of the entities under like a US dollar parent, and then you could just consolidate? And then you could just rely on that. Not to put you on the spot, but this is a discussion I have with a lot of companies. And there are reasons for it. Sometimes it's the base entities plus the parents, and then it gets to be a really messy structure. And later we'll talk about how to address that in customs. But I do see currency-related hierarchies. USD is probably the most common one in North America, but sometimes we'll see some entities that are grouped up to translate into GBP or Euro or something else. Last one is interesting. It's guarantor, non-guarantor. That can be, usually, I never think that much about that one, but it comes up, and we describe how we can do that. And we create another one, people get very excited, and then they leave, and like, why didn't we think of that in the first place? I don't know. Anything else for entity structure? All right.
Our planning group has a separate hierarchy than our consolidations group does. So in HFM, we keep a planning hierarchy as well.
So in HFM, how is your planning hierarchy different than your consolidation hierarchy?
There's some entities that aren't included in planning that are included in our consolidation.
Okay. So some entities that you don't plan for. Okay, I can see that. Usually when we're negotiating with planning, between HFM and planning, planning tends to be cost center driven. And if I have my choice, I put cost centers in a custom. And this is where EPMA comes in, or DRM, where you want them to share the same hierarchy, but it needs to be in a different dimension. It can be tricky, but these are things that you have to think through up front. Planning, in my experience, rarely has this idea of legal entity. They don't care about it, right? All right, so just a few tips here. The master parent. So here's a little hierarchy over here, just a sample. I love this. You have, so I've got corporate view, legal roll-up, geographic roll-up, management view, you know, just your typical. I've got a few hierarchies. If I want to consolidate them all, sometimes I see, well, somebody will consolidate all with data on the first one, then consolidate, consolidate, consolidate. Who does that? Some of us do. This would actually be nicer if you don't do this already, please do, is just create a parent above that. Just all entities. Just, it gives you one place to click from, right? You just, I call it all entities or all hierarchies or pick your name. It's not a reportable entity, which I'll talk about that in a moment, but it gives you one place to consolidate all with data. When HFM goes through, every entity just gets calculated once. So it's the fastest, most efficient way to, all at once, get all the hierarchies done. Always create a master parent. Don't post adjustments to a parent entity, just some advice, because if you do that, you can't break up that parent. People run into that. If you need to do that, if there's some reason why you just can't stop that force, as somebody's saying we have to adjust that parent, for whatever reason, sometimes you can't stop it. So my advice is just to create a child of that, a single base entity just below that parent, because then later, if you need to break that up, well, it's easier to have that discussion about, now what do I do with the adjustment? You'll have to move that adjustment one place or the other, or they'll have to unpost it and break up the adjustments. Avoid parent currency adjustments. There are reasons why people do them, which is why I use the word avoid and not the word never, but they're problematic. Don't flag parents is ICP. I feel like this is negative. I'm going to get positive in a moment. If you flag parents is ICP, the problem is in the intercompany matching report, all of the entities that are included in that report will translate into the report's currency. If the entities in the reporting currency, if the status is not okay. If it's okay, then the report just runs, all is good. But if it's a parent entity and the status is CN, needs consolidation, HFM can't translate that entity, that parent, until it first consolidates it. So it would have to consolidate it up and then translate that. Imagine what that would do in the middle of your intercompany matching report. Hey, hang on a second, I've got a 15-minute consolidation. Now your matching report takes 15 minutes plus 2 minutes. So that would be good if it actually worked. But the matching report cannot kick off a consolidation, so you just get an error and it aborts. Yeah. Any question? Anybody do that? Flag the parents as is ICP? Do you have that problem once in a while?
So we have multiple applications, and we have some applications that do at parent and some that do at base. We seem to have more problems with the one that's at base because there's too many members for people to select, and then our
Okay.
aren't. Because like that's our small application in comparison to the 4,000 members, and they get confused, and then we don't match, and then it's just
Okay.
Actually, we were working through a project that got postponed recently, but it was to move it
I think I know that project. So just to repeat for the studio audience, because this is being live cast, in your experience, and I'm pretty sure this is one of the applications that I looked at and ran into this problem in the first place, that you do in practice run into more problems with other applications that have a lot more entities for some other reason. Forgive the paraphrasing, but I get it. This is something that I think when I looked at that in the first place, I did not know why this was erroring out. Now I know, I learned. Last one is remove unnecessary members in all dimensions except the currency. Anybody corrupted their application by deleting a currency? I'm really sorry. Oracle development is here today. There's a very nice guy named Rajesh Bhatia. I invite you to say hello to him, smiling guy. He's walking around here. Ask him about that bug. What's that?
It's not supposed to be a bug anymore.
Well, I've seen it in 11.121 all the way through 11.124.
All right, they said 2.4.
I saw it. Any of my friends from Cardinal Health here? Hey, what version are you on? 11.123. All right. All right, I'll try to come up with some evidence, but it's still a problem. So that's why. Don't delete currencies. Even if you don't use them, just leave them there. If there's anything in the product that's really important to you, please ask Rich, Rajesh. They're really good people. They'd like to help you out. And that's why they're here. Sometimes we all need a parent. Veruca Salt. So that's the master parent. All right, save yourself some time and space. So back here, I talked about having a master parent called all entities. Sometimes we can group together entities that we don't really need to report on, but for system reasons, we want to group them together usually it's for purposes of consolidating 2 or 3 hierarchies together. Anyway, if you have any parent entities that are non-reportable, that these are entities that no one in their right mind is going to run a P&L or a balance sheet or any financial statement, they're just there sitting in the hierarchy, it happens, not a problem. Couple things. We don't need to calculate those. We don't need to spend extra time calculating those. We don't need to write data back to those. So here's some rules. I'm not going to go into it here, but the first one is you can skip this. So at the beginning of subcalculate, if it's one of those entities, exit sub. That's what this says right here. Right at the top of subcalculate. If you're one of these, nobody's going to look at you. I don't need to run a single rule for you. Especially if they're high-level entities, you can save yourself a few minutes or longer in your consolidation by skipping them. Sub-consolidate the same thing. If my parent is one of these non-reportable entities, exit sub. Means I'm done with this, move on to the next entity. So this is the logic. If you have a lot of these, do you remember that application that had 44 entity hierarchies? We did this a lot. We just put user-defined 1 on them, and we save them, I don't know, 10 million rows in their data tables. We save them so much time among some other changes that we made. So this can be huge. If it's 1 or 2 entities, it's probably not that big a deal, but just try it out, and it's easy enough. And if you have any questions, send me a note, and I'd love to help you. Just ask. This is just a visual explanation of what that is. You basically just skip the calculation routine, and if your parent is one of those non-reportable entities, the road stops here at parent in the value dimension. We don't write to proportion or elimination, and that's where all the savings are. All right, it's very technical. Let's move on with the next one. Here's a few other hierarchy ideas. I talked already about total entity, so I changed the name here, all entities, total entities, same thing. And then over here, I have some alternate currencies. Either these are because somebody wants to translate them into these currencies, or we're grouping together those entities, the entities that exist for each currency. I've seen it both ways. So if you do have to do parent currency adjustments, one of the problems is your journal, when you post a parent currency adjustment, it embeds the name of the parent against whom you posted that. So if you try to move that child out from under that parent to another one for a hierarchy change, you can't. Your metadata load will stop and say, you have journals on this. You need to unpost, delete, change. You can avoid that problem if you have to do USD adjustments. If we just can't stop that river from flowing, then what you can do is you can create a USD parent and have all of the base entities that are not USD roll up to that, and then you just pick that as your parent. That will probably never change in the application's life. So, just a nice thing. And doing something like this is better than the forced translation in grids, but I'm still going to come back to you with a custom dimension solution for my friends in the second to the back row. Okay, so here's something else with multi-application intercompany. So if you guys have intercompany where if you have like a parent application and you have multiple subsidiary applications. In the subsidiary applications, they may have intercompany with somebody who's not part of their subsidiary, so we don't eliminate it within their subsidiary. So what we can do is we can create those entities in their application under something called, not my partners, just some other hierarchy, create them. Nobody will ever load data to them or create or journal or whatever, but those entities exist solely so that they can be flagged as ICP, that you can load to them as if they were intercompany partner. They do not eliminate in this hierarchy, but when you extract the data from here to here, now you have the intercompany information preserved. You can pass it over here where it will eliminate. Hopefully that will help somebody. If not, well, just a thought. So this has worked. And you can add security rules so that nobody will see these entities except in the ICP dimension. It's pretty easy. You have done that?
No.
Cool. Validated the concept. Thanks, man. Does it work nicely? Excellent. Thanks. All right. So moving entities around. So in this case, I do see this, unfortunately, with some regularity, where if you have entities that if you move a child, so in this case, I have one, Division 1, Division 2, then I have 2 children under here, 1 child under here. I take company B, and I move it to Division 2. When I do that, I will see this from time to time, not naming any names here, but what will happen is people will lock all of the entities, including the parents. And then they'll move that child over to the other hierarchy. Well, if you follow mathematically, Division 2, which had 80, because it only had Company C before the move, it has 2 children that really don't add up to 80. And the same problem for Division 1. In total, I guess it works. This, to me, is a time bomb. Because what's happening here is, if you ever unlock this, you will never come back to this. And especially if you move things over time, you can never come back to the data that's up there. Please don't do this. If you do move an entity, you should reconsolidate. And then I have heard from time to time that we can't change what was reported. I'm not a CPA, but I would respectfully differ. And that is because usually these changes are below the segment, but even so, it's my understanding that for external reporting, you have to show the world how you view the company. And if you truly are moving entities around, when you show your report and it shows this year against last year against the year before, I believe you need to recast the past to match today's structure. If anybody heartily disagrees with me, I would enjoy a conversation after this, but this is my experience. All right? Well, I'll stop. We'll just move on. But this to me is a danger because you can never rebuild that application and come back to these numbers. That's all, okay?
Can you use org by period?
Alan, so you asked me if we could use org by period. It seems to me pretty logical that we probably could, which makes sense that it's the next slide. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a ringer. Thanks. So here, the logical choice is, let's talk about org by period. Anybody have org by period you're currently working with? More than just 1 or 2 entities? Is it, yeah? How do you like it? It works pretty well? Yeah. You guys, it's okay? It is, yeah, org by period is a very interesting feature set that's not well understood. In fact, Sophia, we had a conversation earlier today about it. And your question, not, if I can share with everybody, it's a common question. Is there a performance problem for that? Which is an understandable question. And my answer was, no, there's not. There's some maintenance things to think about, which is your point. It is a great feature set. It has to serve a purpose. The way that org by period works is it leverages something called the active account. It's a system account that keeps track of, in each period, for each parent, should this child roll up to it. When I say roll up, technically I mean should subconsolidate run for this child. Or if you're using default consolidation logic, which I find weird, but I know it's possible with org by period applications, that the default consolidation just won't run during that period for that child. If a child is active, it runs. If it's not active, it doesn't. So here's an example. There's a lot of numbers to follow here. But again, just like my previous example, we have, we're moving company B from one division to another. In org by period, you don't actually move the entity. In the metadata, you add the entity. You're creating an additional relationship. You must keep the entity in every place that it ever rolled up. You have a superset of the entity structure. So what you're doing is we're creating a new relationship because when we move an entity, it's as of a point in time. We're going to move it in January. Company B rolled up to Division 1. In February, now it rolls up to Division 2. It's a little hard to read, but in Company B under Division 2, I have 0. It's not active in January, but it is active in February, and it's not active for Division 1. When you reconsolidate, HFM looks at that flag, and you will get correct results. Here's one twist to it. If the new parent takes over as of February 1st, we pick up the periodic contribution starting from February 1. The new parent does not deserve the data that was not its during January. That's not good English. You have to do a periodic consolidation, because otherwise, if you did a year-to-date consolidation, the new parent would get everything from Company B for January plus February, which is incorrect. And now to have a problem because on a year-to-date, I'd be double counting. The first parent from January, the second parent has January plus February. So you just have to, there's some things to think about. Alan, does this at least illustrate the concept?
Oh, absolutely.
You want to do it? We have some positive feedback here, so it is a good feature set, and this is, in my opinion, the right solution to this. All right? I'm going to switch, and we're going to talk about scenarios for a little bit. This is actually an easier topic. So in the scenario dimension, let's think about what people do in the scenarios. Actual, which is not an original concept. Anybody have an HFM application that does not have actual data and actual results in it? I mean, I could imagine it happening, but okay, so I haven't seen it yet. Another one is a source, like it's some scenario in local currency, but translated at a different set of rates. Well, that's pretty cool, and I'm going to show you that. Restatement, where we take actual, we grab everything in actual and put some adjustments in it. There are various reasons for analyzing that. Maybe you're going to discontinue something, or you want to do a little bit of modeling in HFM. So I've seen that. The trick is to keep actual in sync with the other scenario. Budgets, usually I often see budgets in HFM. Maybe 20% of the time when I see budgets here, it means that they're using HFM to collect the budget, but the other 80% of the time, they're probably collecting it in something else and loading it. Do you see anything differently? If you see you do see budget, right?
I see budget all the time, but
It's usually a repository, okay. Versus there are some companies who do create some rudimentary forms and do collect budget or forecast. It's really not the right tool for that. Planning is, everybody in agreement? So budget forecasts, this is a fun one. One forecast for 11 or 12. 11 is the most common number of forecasts if you're gonna have forecast data. 1 is probably second most common. But if you have one forecast, the problem there is that you're dumping it and reloading it every single month. So there's a lot of churn that goes on. And then somebody will inevitably ask you, well, what was the forecast from last time? Then we get into versions. Just create 11, unless you do rolling forecasts. If you do a rolling forecast, which every month you're doing 12 months out, you're going to pierce through the year barrier into next year. You can do that, and then you're probably going to end up with 23 forecasts. It's not usually 24 because one of those is the budget. That's my experience, something like that. But all those are doable. The rolling forecast is a little trickier to manage from keeping everything in sync and knowing in each forecast which one of the 2 years is the actual, which one's the forecast. But we can manage that. More or less than 12 periods. You can do strategic plan. I do see applications that have that. Anybody use the year as the frequency, or quarter QTD as the frequency, which means that these scenarios only have 4 buckets in them, Q1, 2, 3, 4. If you look at January through December, those are invalid intersections. Anybody try that? You have that? How do you like that?
Works good.
Is it quarterly or? Quarterly, okay. Long range planning or forecast? Forecast, okay, well good. It's a feature that's been around since HFM was architected. I think it's pretty interesting. Rather than, if you didn't do that, what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is that I put the number into March, and then June, and September, and then December. Well, then I have to deal with the reversal of the data depending on how you do the zero view setting. So the 4 quarters is nice, and if you're doing a 5-year plan, setting the frequency to year to date is really nice because you just have one bucket to put in for each year for the next 5 years. So weekly, anybody have weekly? Weekly in the period dimension or in a custom dimension? Okay, so I've worked with HFM for 18 years, and if you have a weekly calendar, are you from Avery Dennison? No, damn. You are? A ringer. What company do you work with? Okay. Well, Avery Dennison was the first one that I've seen. It works very well because it's a small data set, so thank you. Hi, Nathan. So it works well. Daily had been a problem. I don't know if it will work in 11.124 where you actually have 366 base periods, but there are significant performance problems related to that because every record is really long. So that's why daily doesn't usually exist in the period dimension. If we do it, it's usually a custom. Okay, so I'm gonna move on. I just have a comment here about the zero view settings. I'm going to skip that. So with respect to taking your base data and translating it at different rates, it's very common. It's really, really easy. So you take from some scenario, actual or budget, for example, and we grab the data from entity currency and entity currency adjustment. We then blend it together with rates from some other place, and we bring it together in a new scenario. This can all be done in rules. Very easily. Some people will do it in FDM. I personally believe that rules is the nicest way to do it. But this is the idea. You're just creating what we often refer to as FX scenarios. Pros, if you're adding more scenarios, you're not, well, there's pros and cons with it. If you do it in scenarios, it's really nice if people need the FX information, the actual at some other rate, not at the same frequency as you need to see your actual results. And that is maybe a couple times a month somebody looks at that. Putting in another scenario is nice because you don't have to consolidate that other scenario. It just sits off to the side. The alternative to this, which I will talk about next, or a little later I think, is doing it in a custom dimension. If you do it in a custom dimension, then the alternate rate information is available at all day long. Let me see, pros and cons. It does slow down the consolidation a little bit, about 15%, but in another presentation I've done in the past, we show that overall cycle time is reduced about 25%. And that is when you add the consolidation time for actual plus all of the various other scenarios together, rather than on the target scenario doing a consolidate all. Anybody do that to copy the data? Good. So that's the alternative. So we do add an impact status and it does slow down actual a little bit, but overall I think it's great. All right, I'm gonna move on here. So in a custom dimension, is anybody here from this application in Pennsylvania? No? Okay. In this application that we won't name, what we did in a custom dimension is, it's very hard for you to see back there, but let's just imagine that there are roughly 25 different ways that you could possibly translate each scenario. So we have something that we begin called the default rate. This is actual at actual, this is budget at budget, whatever. It's the default rate. Then we have a series of triggers that we can create that say, okay, here are your selections. You have this, which rates do you want to use? By typing into a form, your ones, it's basically checking off which things that you'd like. HFM can, using this logic, using a little bit of subcalculate where we're copying the data to the other custom, and then running the translation logic, which I presented here, you can get, during every single consolidation, your data being translated according to these alternate rates. Performance really surprised me. This worked like a charm. We also improved their rules. We found some other places that were slowing down consolidation. So I was shocked by this, meaning the consolidation for this, I don't know, every month, and it's a normal number of entities, 1,000, something like that. It probably consolidates in less than 15 minutes. Normally, every single scenario isn't translated 30 different ways. They're normally translated about 6 different ways, but that's still pretty impressive. Any thoughts? Anybody would like to do this? Try it. Come on, it's really cool. It really is. So let's talk. Now we're going to get into custom dimensions. Who knows what this is called? The everlasting gobstopper. Very good. All right. It was supposed to be funny. Gobs of customs. Nah, I'm just not that. You have the same look that my kids have. Dad, you're just not funny. So in the custom dimensions, let's talk about what people are doing. Very commonly, we can see sub-account, product, channel, region, business unit. We talked about cost center already. The flows, very often roll forwards, which are then related to cash flow usually. Segment, geography. Cell 2 is very interesting because cell 2 is a variation of geography. In a geography roll-up, which we can often do in the entity hierarchy, we're adding the entities together according to the countries in which revenue is recognized. So if I'm in Switzerland, I have a Swiss entity. If that Swiss entity sells into France and Italy, well, my entity and my revenue is in Switzerland. But for other analysis, we'd like to know how much are we selling into these other countries. That's really your customer destination. That's what I call the cell 2 geography. Often it doesn't come from the GL. We have to load it from some subledger, but it can be really interesting. Maybe we'll have some statistical accounts that we will tie back to what came out in the P&L, but it's a nice thing to do, and for me, it comes up a lot in manufacturing, I would think. Rate analysis, which I described a moment ago, cash flow. Just curious, how many people do fully automated or semi-automated cash flow in their HFM application? Okay, that's pretty good. You all can do it. But that's another subject that I won't get into here. I've done, I think, about 7 different cash flow implementations in the last 2 years, so I don't know how I got picked to do all this, but it's pretty interesting. It can be done by the raise of hands, thank you. It can be done, so if you have any concern about it, you can see around and talk to these people. All right, weeks and days, I mentioned functional P&L. This one is a hot topic, usually in manufacturing. And that is, how do you design your account dimension in a manufacturing company? Does your account, is it your natural accounts? Is it, sales through gross margin is usually not a problem, I guess, except where do we put salaries? Do I have one line that says salaries, rent, travel, all of that? Those are natural accounts that's usually what exists in your ERP system, in your GL. Well, when we write a report, usually we want to say, you know, sales, cost of goods, gross margin, R&D, gross G&A, et cetera, right? That is a functional view that's usually driven by your cost centers. So this tension in application design, and I've gone back and forth, I personally prefer the natural view in your account dimension because that lines right up with your ERP system. But this idea of a functional P&L, usually every single account, your natural accounts, can then be broken up, and usually this functional P&L is cost center and custom, pick a custom. So you have all of the cost centers that comprise research and development, marketing, IT, general administrative. And what those are, it's really the collection of all of the expenses for each of those cost centers. But this is a debate in itself, which one you want. So which one have you done more often? Functional in the account or in a custom?
Functional, now I would say it's account, functionals and custom. This is do it
Functional and custom? I'm going to take a survey. Anybody, if you know what I'm talking about, if you have the natural accounts, rent, travel, salaries, whatever, in your account dimension, raise your hand. Okay, how about in a custom dimension instead, which means that your account dimension is by function, right? So the majority is the first, where your natural account is in the account. I've always been curious. Thank you very much for indulging me there. See, Jordan, we got some discussion here. So let's talk about my favorite is the data source dimension. So do you know where your data comes from? This is it's a river of chocolate. So very nice, but don't fall into it. So in the data source dimension, it's a way for us to capture data by its origin. Where did it come from? I can look at eliminations. I can look at joint venture, minority interest effect. So let's say, actually I should have put this slide first. We start off with the data from our general ledger. We can type in data for supplemental purposes. We can adjust that, and we have the adjusted trial balance. Each layer allows us to separate where our data is coming from. The general ledger, if I have to refeed that, I can use data protection or smart merge or smart replace, Tony's approach. I can just wipe out what's sitting in general ledger and I can leave everything else, which is really nice. You never want to ask a user to retype in their data. So this is great. So we build up here, we've got your adjusted trial balance. We can create different kind of adjustments. So these are top sides, push down adjustments. You could just add them, they're custom members. Then what I have is the total amount before eliminations happen. When I perform an intercompany elimination in the sub-consolidate routine, I can redirect those eliminations into its own bucket so that on a consolidated basis, I can always see what was my amount before eliminations. I can put the automated eliminations in another column. I can see the net of that. It's so nice. I don't have to go on a hunting trip and add up all of the elimination members. So I also like to see what are my allocations. Maybe I want to separate profit and inventory eliminations because those are a peculiar beast in their own right. I can come up to continued operations. I can then make adjustments related to discontinued operations, which is great because if I'm going to discontinue part of an entity, I can't really move the entity into a hierarchy called disc ops, but I can make a set of adjustments that shows the sum of all of the discontinued operations. Restatement adjustments. So this is another variation on the same theme. You're starting with GL and you're building up here. Here are 4 different kind of allocations because as a rule writer, I would like to see how much each allocation changed my data. Also, it helps me to troubleshoot if I made a mistake. I'm like, okay, I'm only populating this thing. And this is a little plus sign because anytime you do an allocation, somebody wants a way to adjust it. So under that is one that says automated member and the other one is adjustment member. And then over here, these are non-GAAP adjustments, which is just another variation on this. Maybe I come up to US GAAP and I have another member above that, which is to get me to non-GAAP or management. All really easy. Make a joke about it. It's like candy, but all right, it wouldn't be funny. Here's a little bit of the logic, which I won't go through, except to say that this is the logic related to putting your eliminations in a custom dimension. And here's another variation on it where we can show, as we consolidate and eliminate, sometimes we would like to know if these entities are meeting at the first common parent, these are the eliminations that occur at this level, which are intercompany eliminations. But as I go up to the next level, the ones that I did earlier are really intra-company. As I keep going higher and higher, now I have new intercompany eliminations, but what was intercompany is now within the division, it's intra-company. It's a little confusing to think about, but the logic is very easy, and I can just move between these. When you get up to the top entity, there are no new intercompany eliminations. Usually they're all intra, they're within your company. And at the bottom entity, it's all intercompany, so anyway. Very easy to do, really, really easy. I think we do this in most of our designs. All right, we're coming near the end here. So I told you, and Gary and Liz is for you, you can do translation in a custom dimension. Have you tried this, discussed this at all? So the request from one of my customers, and this is, by the way, anybody work with Essbase here? This is going to be like, we do this in Essbase all the time. Okay, well, this is new to us in HFM. You wouldn't say it with that same voice, but probably thinking, what's this guy talking about? So what we can do is we have the data that comes in local reporting. We have another member, which is USD reporting. So I can translate, because translation is just math. It's just another rule. All I'm going to do is I'm going to write in subcalculate, take the data from local reporting, go and find the rate from whatever my currency is. I can ask the entity's default currency from my entity to US dollar. Now I have a rate, and I just run through a little loop that says if it's a P&L or if it's a flow, use the average rate. If it's a balance sheet, use the other rate. It's a little complicated, but still possible, and I've done it, to do the overrides. So it all works, and it's amazing. Then every single entity that you have in the system has already been translated into US dollar, and it really doesn't affect performance much. Was it a 5% increase in performance? It wasn't even on my radar. But it was so cool, they loved it. And it matches what people do in Essbase and planning. So in HFM, we also do, and there are hidden slides in here when you download this, where we also translate. So what I translate in USD reporting is also the same answer that when I translate in HFM's value dimension to US dollar, I have to get the same answer, which it works, trust me. Very cool, and you don't need those alternate hierarchies, and nobody's doing forced translations anymore. And we can extend it to do other currencies. On the same theme, what we can do is we can take that, and I can do US dollar adjustments. Or here's one where I did US dollar loaded. We're building a new application, and I didn't want to retranslate everything. So I put in a data source dimension, here's my total US dollar amount. Here's my local currency amount. When I translate, I don't actually translate. I just go pick up everything that I have sitting in this USD loaded number and substitute that in. This works really well for people who want to load from the ERP where that does the translation. So this is nice, very easy to do. There's a variation on this where you can do US dollar adjustments. Instead of substituting in my US dollar amount, I'm just adding it. I'm just incrementing so I just translated into my parent currency, US dollar, and I'm layering in the US dollar adjustments. So I have, just like in the previous slide where I have off to the side the US dollar loaded amount, I have another member called the USD adjustment input. It's sitting off to the side. When I translate, I'm pulling it up here. The difference has to do with the aggregation weights. This doesn't sum up. I'm pulling it into a member that does add up to an aggregation weight of 1. So this is a really nice, easy way to get around parent currency problems. Okay? I know there was a lot to hit you right at the very end. I'd love to talk, we can take some more questions, or we can take questions. I didn't take any really here. So let me take a moment. We're right on the, okay. Can I field some questions, and then we'll see. Sorry in the last minute, but I'm here all day. Anyone have any questions about some of the things that I touched on, or did I stun you, or just too much all at once? If you have any general questions, I would love to catch up with you the hallway down in the exhibit hall. I think, Julian, is he still here? We are going to have a panel discussion, not to put Julian on the spot. We're going to have a panel discussion, I think, on Wednesday You can ask any questions that you want. If you see me in the hall, you can ask any questions you want. Ask me anything about music. That makes me really happy. So, Taylor? No online questions? All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for attending, and welcome to Payscope. Fill out your forms, and see you tonight for the lip sync battle. Do your surveys. Have the fish.